co-productions and bridging the globe through content. And I'm excited to have these people near me. So let's get into it. I would love if each of you can say your names, your position, or your job that you do, as well as how you've been involved in international productions.
Hey everybody, I'm Sonia Gambaro. I'm an independent producer at times in my life. I'm also a television executive. I most recently produced all 4 seasons of Acapulco on Apple TV+.
My name is Erika. I'm a filmmaker, writer, director, I guess an editor as well, sadly, but I just did a film called Espina, which is a co-production between Slave 5 and Condé Nast. And I'm working on a ESPN documentary which is shot in Chile.
My name is Yira Vilaro. I work at Media Pro Studio, and yeah, most recently just wrapped a movie in the Canary Islands called The End of It, filmed by this amazing director, Maria Martinez-Bayona, and before that I was on Pablo working with Pablo Lane.
Thank you. So as you guys can see, we've got a really experienced panel who can talk to you about filming all over the globe and how to hopefully unite the world through that production. I am going to now direct some questions directly to each of you, and then we'll do the group speed round later. So the first one is to Sonia. You produced Acapulco, a hit show that shoots in Mexico for Apple, but had a majority American writing staff and American pilot director. That is quite the hybrid team. Can you tell us about the road to production? Was there a debate about where to shoot it? Was Mexico almost not Mexico? And were there tax incentives that were harder to get due to some of Apple's standards?
Yeah, so I think for our show, it was always going to be Mexico because it's Acapulco. Originally, it was entitled Almost Paradise. So we could have set it in any sort of place, but it was inspired by Acapulco in the 80s. And so for that reason, it was very important to us to film in Mexico. And at the time, and probably still now, it was almost impossible to get insurance to shoot in Guerrero. So we started thinking about other places, and we considered, Puerto Vallarta was always on the list, but we considered some other places as well. And eventually, we just kind of felt like the right hotels and the right look that we could mimic and cheap were for Acapulco in the 80s was best in Puerto Vallarta. We also had to look at the flights, how many flights there were in and out during the day. And so that's kind of like why we settled there. And in terms of like the above the line being mostly American versus below the line, I think our original creators, Eduardo Cisneros and also Jason Schumann, their writing team, and then we brought in Austin Winsberg to help rewrite that original pilot with him. Subsequently, had to bring on a couple other writing teams to do the 102 and 103, the second and third episode. And so I think all of that was with an eye to get Apple more invested financially, and ultimately that was what helped get the green light. I think there was a healthy amount of skepticism on their end because it was one of their first shows that they were doing that was going to be shot in Mexico, but the intention was for it to be U.S. facing. And so in those sort of scenarios, the top brass, in addition to all of us producers, which there were quite a few in the end, just kind of had to make those decisions on like the heads of departments and directors and such. We did have a Mexican director slated to do the pilot who dropped out for his own personal reasons a few days out from the beginning of prep, and so we had to scramble really quick, and we were fortunate to be able to nab Richard Shepard, who was an incredible pilot director, and largely responsible for striking the aesthetic that I think is a large part of why Acapulco ended up being successful and going on for 4 seasons. So I think, what we were successful in doing after a while, like we switched companies, but we brought in a wonderful line producer at the beginning, probably after prep on season 1. We brought in Alejandra Cardenas, who is the owner of Sin Sentido Production Services in Mexico City, and she just did an extraordinary job. She had a great bedside manner. She had worked on a few shows prior that just kind of help us kind of be that translator between Apple and how things function in Mexico. And through her, we were able to get, I think most of our HODs were Mexican. We ended up with a American cinematographer who did extraordinary work, Grant Smith. And he ended up being like more Mexican than the rest of us by the end. I think everybody learned Spanish through the whole process as well. But we truly did end up becoming a big family. But to answer your question, the road to production was really logistics kind of focused. Where's a place that has an airport that we can get to and get people in and out? We're going to be able to, we had to bring in extras for Mexico City often. We needed to have like 3 flights a day at least for Mexico City. And what could be doubled for Acapulco, not just Acapulco, but what could be doubled for Malibu. So like that opening scene with Eugenio, originally we were going to shoot it in Malibu, and I had stayed at a lovely house in Punta de Mita, which is technically in Nayarit, and I said, let's go scout over there and see if there's a modern house that we can shoot for Malibu, because the way that it's situated does feel like Malibu, and indeed that's what we ended up doing.
Very cool, thank you. On the other end of the budget spectrum, not an Apple original TV series, we have Daniel, whose new movie, Espina. If you did not see it at NALIP, see it as soon as you can. It is my favorite indie movie of the year so far. Daniel, you did a great job. Can you talk through the importance of telling your story in Panama? Was that a financial decision, or did it start on the page? I've made movies in other language before, and it can make it a tougher sell when you get to distribution. Can you tell us why it was important to be specific and literally speak your truth through Spanish language in Panama?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Beyond the Obvious Choice, it started on the page, for sure. Beyond the Obvious Choice was saying, I'm also Panamanian, and Jonathan lives in Panama, so the main character of the film lives here, and he has a disability, so it was much easier for us to shoot there in essence. But the reality of it all is, well, this is a story about a guy with a disability who goes on a journey to find the doctor who caused his disability and confront him. But we wanted to tell this story with a lens of humor, of stylization, to make it elevated and beautiful. But more than that, it really, to me, it was a story of, it was a coming of age for someone who at 27 years old didn't had that opportunity to experience a coming of age. And so this script was for him, this idea of first experiences. And in the page, I thought, Panama has so many wonderful environments and landscapes, and it has a gorgeous city with landscape, with skyscrapers. It has a jungle right there and a beautiful beach. And it's all really close by, and it's like, to me, there's a person who has to live through so many experiences in one place. He has to go to Panama. So for me, it was a no-brainer to set the story there. And in writing, I said, okay, so they're going to this new world for the character. and he gets to live all his first times, you know. And obviously, with the script, we were able to win the Panama Film Fund, so financially it helped a lot. The crew there was fantastic. I think shooting in some places of Latin America where, I mean, there are a lot of films going on there, but not as much as you would say, you know, in Mexico or in Colombia, right? And in that sense, there was love from everybody in the crew and from people who were just owners of the location who were shooting there, right? Who gave us so much permission to tell the story that we wanted to tell. And, you know, we would get to some locations there, and the way I like to shoot is sometimes to leave a lot of space for my actors and my characters to have a lot of blocking around, move, but you don't want to see stands around laying there. And we would get to locations where we had to construct all these wonderful sets. And, you know, my incredible cinematographer, Erika, he would say, like, how long do we get around not showing all these systems and things? And so the crew was like, let's just drill into the wall. And we're like, okay, no one's gonna get pissed at that. And everyone there was like, yeah, if you know, fix it later. As opposed to shooting sometimes in Mexico when everyone is so used to people coming into their locations and shooting. So everyone was so friendly, so friendly. We only got in trouble once because we put like a stupid wallpaper, and somebody said, "Oh my God, why?" And I was like, "That's what you complain about, the wallpaper. We drill a hole in the ceiling." It really ultimately became a thing. I think that it was on the script where we decided to. It was for me on the script. It was very important for me to show Panama. It was a financial decision as well because they supported us with the film fund, and yeah, ultimately, you know, for me it was something. It was a no-brainer to do it there, and they were, again, like Jonathan was there. They were friendly with disability, so it was a beautiful shoot as well.
It's
I hope that answers your question.
Yes. And then, so you both have sold projects to different places or in the process of selling your project. Yira, you've been on both sides, but let's talk about your experience as a buyer. So, you know, when you were buying at Amazon, you know, and looking at international projects, both to buy and sell, and some of the other positions, what's the most important thing for you? Obviously, money and creative are always a balance, but can you speak to authenticity and how that informs your enthusiasm about a project?
Yeah, I think authenticity is a funny word because it is key in kind of all the stories like this, but I think for me specifically, it's more about like creative authenticity, like from like a creator point of view, like whatever that means to the person that's telling the story and why they're passionate about telling it, and if it's a cool idea or something unique that you haven't seen before. At Amazon, it was very specific because I was the only Latina on the team for a while, and they had very specific ideas of what Latina stories meant, which has always been, you know, not for right now, but if anybody wants to sidebar about that, what Latina identity means in the context of storytelling in the US, and a lot of the times how it's seen through the gaze of the people above you that are a little bit controlling the storytelling. And I've always, in my career before, you know, my background around Anonymous, it was interesting because I was both a buyer and a seller, but it's mostly like, I want to work with great filmmakers that are, you know, have a point of view that are trying to say something. Sure, some of them are here, you know, but it's like, Carlos Lopez Estrada, and I'm the creator, it's like, I'm Soro, you know, like, what, and I think it stems from there, and also from story, and yeah, and hybrids are also like an interesting, I mean, Acapulco is actually an incredible case study. It's like, how do you make more stories that feel organically bicultural or bilingual or that can exist in both places, you know, where people can flow in and out of English or Spanish, or that it feels organic, and I really am interested in telling more stories like that and trying to tell them authentically. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, thank you. All right, enough of the individual attention. Now I will throw out some general questions to the pool. So the first one, which kind of dovetails off of what Yira was just talking about, how do you create stories that retain cultural depth while resonating with international audiences and buyers? So it's that global specificity balance that we always try to find.
Sure. So I think it's not that difficult, honestly. I think you just need to be honest. And I'm always trying to, when I read a writer or an idea, I'm looking not for anything to feel like, oh, this is, you know, a Mexican story or a Chicano story or a Puerto Rican story. No, I really want to be surprised by their perspective and their truth, and that we always say that voice, but what voice really is that the way that they see the world is they are able to articulate it and illustrate it in a way with words that is startling. And so I think when you get somebody who's free enough to not self-edit and to just lay it all out there, that resonates and transcends all barriers, whether it be socioeconomic or cultural. And I think that's what we all thirst for when we're looking for those stories to kind of, you know, soothe us at the end of our busy days. Like, oh, this person in Malaysia is, you know, kind of dealing with the same bullshit that I am. And you can even, you know, it's even in some of our most valued, like, historical texts. I don't know. And somebody told me a couple years ago, because I was really riled up about everything, and he's like, you need to study some Stoicism, you know, go read some Marcus Aurelius. And I'm like, all right, man. So I go and I buy, you know, a Marcus Aurelius book, and I'm like, damn, same bullshit, different, you know, millennium. And so he's really kind of going through that a lot of the same issues that plague all of us. And so I'm just looking for that truth and that ability to be vulnerable and speak your truth in a way that is refreshing. And that's, I think, you know, and it has, in our case, it's through a very specific cultural window. And oftentimes, like what Yira was alluding to, is the buyers of these networks have a very specific idea of what the Mexican experience is, and it's largely informed by what has already been in media. And so what I ask them oftentimes in my general meetings with them is like, look, trust us to bring this perspective, because it's not all first generation immigrant stories, it's not all, you know, love stories on the border about some soccer star-crossed lovers. You know, there's a lot of projects that are just simply our New Girl, you know, our Broad City. And so I think that's still something that we are endeavoring to you know, let people know, unfortunately, you know, something that I think of every day.
100%, I think I totally agree with you. I think it is right now about the tokenizing Latino stories or stories in general, also disability stories, about bringing them out of the box and just telling, as you said, speaking the truth, telling refreshing stories where the characters happen to be Latino or they happen to have a disability, but it's not the sole focus necessarily, but it's something that just adds to the narrative and makes it stronger, but at the same time, it's not the sole focus of the story. So we're not looking into the stereotypes, or we're just deconstructing actually what it means to be Latino, but in a way where it just resonates with everyone, because that's the truth. Right now, I think everyone is just so tired of the same bullshit, of trying to fit your story in the same box when you have a story that's like where the character happens to be Latino, but it just fits in a completely different scenario. And it's as I said, it's time to. There's so much noise. There's so much saturation of films right now, of stories, and to really float about them. Let's listen to vulnerable stories. Let's look at what is really, what feels, personal also in a way.
Yeah, like your movie. That's why it's so exciting. The independent film right now has just such a wonderful moment. Kind of brought about by the contraction of the industry. But what stories can we get done below 5 million? And they're largely very personal, deep, interesting stories with those refreshing perspectives, and I think that's very exciting and reminiscent of like the mid-90s, mid to late 90s. So I think it may be a depression for television, but with through all of this new independent film that we're seeing, I think there's an opportunity for a lot of people to have breakthroughs.
Absolutely.
Especially internationally too, because in the US, like Espina, again, it's such an incredible film. And it's like, how do you, it might have been like grassroots hard to finance in the US, there's no stars, who is this guy? And,
Jonathan is a star.
Yeah, he is, by the way, he's amazing. But the way you said, I think it's a little bit like, sometimes it's like a little bit patronizing how Latino stories are like treated, or like, it's like, oh, who would have thought? Like, I mean, a guy in a wheelchair is a normal human being who can also be an asshole, and it's like, and it's how are we able to take control of these stories, and like, if they're not going to let us, how do we tell them ourselves in the way that we want to tell them? And yeah, I don't know. He's the means of production, but how do you?
Just one last thing on that is, I think, and it's really important to say this right now, it is our backstory that makes our stories human at a time where we need our stories to feel more human. With AI, of course.
Absolutely. To that point, and I'm sure this is a question that our independent producers out here might be wondering, what festivals do you guys see right now as being the warmest platforms for launching global stories? And that same question for the buyers in film and TV on the platform side. Like, who do you think is most receptive to getting international stories right now?
Well, I'm not going to speak about film festivals because I'm very much a TV person, but I will say on the platforms, obviously the ones who have the machines set up for it, which are Netflix and Amazon, and in large part Apple, but that's a very specific mandate that they have over there. And I think there are some aspirations on the part of Hulu. We've seen some more programming coming out of them, and they are star outside of the United States. So a few years ago we wouldn't take something to Hulu that was needed to have an international audience, whereas now that you do. And theoretically Peacock and NBC Universal would, because of their alliance with Telemundo, but I have found that hasn't quite yielded any fruits to speak of quite yet. So I would say, your big ones are Apple, Netflix, and Amazon.
And on the festival end, I would say, well, the reality is that times are changing very fast, and I would say there's new festivals, there's festivals who are adapting to these changes. These are the gatekeepers in some way. And this old model of let's categorize films because we only have one slot for disability, which is, and they just reduce disability as a theme, or reduce Latino stories as a theme, which is not that's not true. Now it's about, as you were saying before, it's about stories that are vulnerable and that are resonating, and just look past the one slot for disability, So they're the festivals that are looking past that are being bold about the programming, and definitely shout out to NALIP for what they're doing. And yeah, I think it's those kind of festivals that are just looking past this the traditional, what's a festival movie, right? What doesn't really comprise a festival movie, and not just reduce it to one slot per, or a number of slots per category of international or whatever. I think there's just so much more to that. We do have, and also for distributors too, you know, we've encountered in our conversations with some distributors where it's like, no, we can only do one disability movie a year. I'm like, what the fuck? So no, I think yeah, it's that traditional model is going by. Audiences crave original stories. They don't care if the characters happen to be disabled or they love the fact that they're Latino, but really, they just want to be entertained, they want to have a good time, they want to connect with the movie. That's what's important. It's not the little boxes or checks is really hitting right now. It's how it connects with audiences, and the festivals and distributors are looking for that, are the ones that are adapting in the future. That's what I would say.
And yeah, to put about, I think you both covered it, but the films especially, I think there's a lot of I feel like Cannes this year was a lot more US facing and international. I think there's a lot more crossover now. They got like Surat, and it was just an accident, and that's a Gambaro movie. But there's, and all of that was, it's I think to the point there's you can count on one hand and a half the number of theatrical distributors in the US. So the fact that there's more indie financiers and indie studios popping up, and there's more creative ways to put these movies together and get them international exposure. And I'm very grateful for Neon too, doing good work. And yeah, hopefully you can find ways to actually get these movies made, get them an international platform, and then back it into the US.
I'll add one thing to that, because oftentimes I will watch directors and watching short films, especially for directors, and maybe you weren't able to get into Sundance or South by or TIFF or something like that, but if I see that you have some respectable list of 4 to 5 smaller ones, I respect the hustle, and I'll watch it tonight, but I'll watch it within the next month. And oftentimes those are the directors that I kind of meet with pretty often, honestly. And I think that what I'm also looking for are some follow-ups, so if I hear from somebody in June of this year, I'd like to see another short by maybe June of next year, or something of the sort, showing me not just a progress in your talent, but also perseverance, because all of this is a marathon,
Email again, please.
Yeah, and also sometimes you don't need to get into all these big fancy festivals. You can sell your film going to the smaller festivals with a competent sales agent.
And I think to that point too, what's interesting is pay attention, because a lot of those smaller festivals are still Oscar qualified. Now, is that short film necessarily going to get an Oscar? It's hard. Wes Anderson just put out a whole bunch, if you remember. So sometimes that's harder. But what I have seen, and there's a woman that I mentor who's an amazing filmmaker, Anhor Youssef, who had a film last year that did really well as a short film. And what she did, she targeted those Oscar qualifying festivals, and she got into one. And then she campaigned her butt off to then make it to the long list. She didn't get shortlisted, she didn't get nominated, but now on her list of qualifications is longlisted for an Oscar. And it really helps her with getting an agent, it helps her with the rest of her process. And so I do think, while yes, those big festivals are so important, don't forget that there are lots of little tunnels and bridges that we can take to get to our goals. Now about the other side of things, if you guys had a time machine, what international co-pro pitfalls would you warn your prior self about? Did you learn any lessons the hard way?
Weather. So,
Hurricane season?
yeah, hurricane season, also just the heat, really, when we shot the first season of Acapulco, it was summer, it was COVID. we were in like an NBA style bubble, and you know, it's a very ambitious show to shoot. You can't, there's no margin for error. And at the end of that shoot, it was like people, you know, were going to kill each other just because we're all stuck together. And it's so humid, it's so hot, and it's raining. And I just remember barely finishing getting a shot of an episode right before the sun came up, and we had kind of battled rainstorms all night, and extras were like helping us with like props and art department stuff, and you know, that was nice on like kind of a familial sort of like we're in this together sort of vibe. But as a producer, we soon found out, like, you know, it's just better to shoot in that part of the country, you know, January to May. You gotta get out. Third week of May, do not fuck around, get out, you know what I mean? And so when we were waiting for that fourth season, you know, pickup, we had the writer's room was going, and we were all just kind of on the edge of our seats waiting for that fourth, you know, the order to production. And, you know, I was one of many EPs on that show, but if, you know, in the future on my own show, by myself or whatever, if I'm the lead producer, I'll be very bullish on making sure that I'm protecting the production, protecting the crew, and just so it's an easier kind of go at it. I don't want extras fainting and having to deal with that heat. And that happens on so many things, but also like I think my first camera operator, I want to make sure that he's comfortable, he or she is comfortable through the whole thing. And so whether you're in Mexico or you're in Japan or Tokyo or whatever, like really pay attention to the weather, talk to your line producers out there, talk to your locations, and a lot of the time they'll be like, oh, this is a big fancy American thing. They're gonna kind of tell you what you want to hear. Go talk to somebody on their team that's just like an assistant or whatever and get the real deal. Yep.
We got really lucky with weather on our end. It was a blessing in the sense that we were in the jungle, so it's been rainy season that we never got. So we were always bracing for it and afraid of it, and knowing that we were going to lose a lot of script pages if it rains because we had such a tight budget. But we never did, and so we were very happy. I think for us, the Eight Falls actually happened more. We got really lucky with the shoot, honestly. I mean, my producer's here, she's looking at me. Did we? Honestly, for me, I traveled back in time. I did, you know, making this film, and like, it was very hard to make. It's much harder to sell. We should have started selling it even before it was made. But I don't know, putting up much effort. Not saying that we had to do a pre-sale, because that's everybody's, I would say, wish or a dream when you're making your movie, but putting up bigger effort on already foreseeing the kind of megalithic effort that was going to be to sell this project, feeling, you know, this community and all the things that this film is about. But that, and I believe that it is so important to look into also the sort of work in progress. A lot of festivals, or there's a lot of how would you say, like work in progress. Like Sundance offers a work in progress too, you know, and those are so helpful to also not just help you shape the narrative of your film once you've finished that, but also prepare you for the festival route, prepare you for the sales part of everything. And I think I would have tried to travel back in time. I would have thought of the project more into this sort of work in progress, trying to make it more friendly, I would say, for the gatekeeper side of things.
Everything's been so perfect.
I think, yeah, international productions, especially in this hybrid, I mean, we just shot a movie in Spain, which was like half English-speaking crew, half Spanish-speaking crew, and somehow everybody was like understanding each other and getting along, and it felt like it was like a flowing production. sometimes I shot a movie in Colombia which was a little more complicated, but I think part of it is, but a takeaway which I don't have the answer, something that I would like to figure out is how do we, like, want to bring more production to Latin America, even stuff that is in English, you know, even stuff that is not set in Latam, although ideally it would be, but it's like, instead of going to shoot in like Budapest, I want to go shoot in Uruguay or you know, or Colombia is great, but like once that's already like so cost effective and you get all these tax incentives, like, don't squeeze the budget even further, you know, because it's like you're already saving money. I don't know why when something turns Latam, all of a sudden they try to squeeze the budget even more. And it's like, don't do that. Like, I don't know who is in charge of those purse strings, but it's like, have enough money, have a contingency, you know, so that if your production designer all of a sudden is like, fuck this, you know, you don't, the whole movie almost doesn't work, you know? So stuff like that.
Totally agree. The last question, you know, right now, as you may have gathered, we're in divisive times. Can you guys speak to some of the global unity you've been able to witness in your international productions? What gives you hope?
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of like shooting of our own social media assets behind the scenes in Acapulco, and I think I'm excited for Apple to start rolling it out for season 4, but I just love how, for instance, I mentioned our DP earlier, Grant Smith on the weekends, you know, sometimes on these shows, everybody like kind of clicks up into their little groups, and you know, you don't want the gauchos with the gauchos and the Latinos with the Latinos. We were very much integrated, and like this crew would all go together, and there was Grant with them, and they would just, you know, it's like him and his camera guys and a lot of the rigging guys would just like hang out really tough together. And then on our end, you know, I kind of am a social butterfly, so I part of my producing style is being a head of department whisperer, so I just kind of go in and hang out with all of them, and I felt like what was nice is sometimes you'd see like the lead of the show hanging out with like a director that was in town, hanging out with like some of our, co-stars or whatever, sometimes some really big actors, and you know, a grip or an electric guy, you know, and they just happen to find their common ground, and I just feel like, you know, people just need to listen more instead of, I think on social media we're all just kind of posting on our soapboxes and everything's real divisive, but if we just kind of listen to each other and actually hear instead of thinking about what we're going to say next, we can truthfully find some common ground with most anybody and hopefully, you know, right this ship, because we're not going anywhere good right now, you know. And I would love to do many, many more productions in Mexico and beyond and still have that sort of family vibe grow together. And that doesn't happen when, you know, certain people feel like, oh, I'm better than everybody else, I'm just going to go and isolate myself.
I would say with our project specifically, look, I worked for almost 9 years in this corporation that are ominous US, and you know, you have Vogue and Vanity Fair and the New York and all these brands. And very rarely we would do Latin American projects. Usually the American projects would go to GQ Mexico and the Mexican side of the company, which wasn't as massive as the US side of the company. And when we brought the documentary to Esco, which inspired the feature, which is, somewhat inspired the feature, but it allows us to also do the feature. When I brought this, it was a documentary about disability. It was in Spanish, and they loved it. They released it with the New Yorker, and it became the best performing documentary of that year, I think, and it went viral, and it got like, it was like 3 million views in 2 hours. It was all over the place, and you could see from the comments that it was mainly with US audiences. And before that, usually when I bring Latin American projects, sometimes it was difficult because you have to prove that there were metrics for it. And I think you talked about metrics earlier for Latin American projects, but it's like, we have to create, we have to look into where those really are. And so the fact that this played in Spanish went viral, and then we did the feature, and they also partnered with us, is I would say it's like the mainstream media, you know, like they are, yeah, the Leonco. And the fact that this Espina became the first Hispanic co-production, it just, you know, for me as a Latino who worked with them for so long, it just meant so much. And this idea that I brought these two worlds together, it was something beautiful. And I hope, and I know, and I am aware, because this opened the doors for them to say, let's pay attention to more Latino projects. We understand that language is not a barrier anymore. Everybody wants to read subtitles. Nobody cares about subtitles. They read them, they see them.
I want to believe that. I want the data to support that. I mean, there's Squid Game. I'm like, are most people just watching the subtitles, or are they watching it dubbed? I've had conflicting reports. But there's like feelings of hope was that. Honestly, I think, not to be, but like, to plug it back into NALIP, we did the accelerator right before this panel, and we got to sit down and hear a bunch of the projects that made it, and I actually was very inspired by that, because they were really great projects, they're really great creatives, and to your point, like, they're universal stories, they're just good stories, and it was funny because a lot of them were like, you can speak English or Spanish, you know, and I was like, you can do it either way, actually, like, and the important thing is that the thing gets made. I don't know, and it gave me hope that there are paths to doing the thing, you know, that there's not one monolithic thing, you know, that we can, not that everything is about circumventing the gatekeepers, you know, but being creative and making things.
Totally. And what gives me hope are you guys and NALIP and all of this, because we're still here and we're not going anywhere. And we are very proud to be a part of all of this. Our time is up. We're 2 minutes and 36 seconds over. We apologize for those minutes of your life. But thank you guys very much for being a wonderful audience. Thank you again to NALIP, and thank you to the panelists.